So I'm Kao Zhen, and I'm from Arizona State University. Today, I'm very excited to talk about what we've been doing recently. So this is a joint work done by a group of researchers from Chinese Academy of Sciences, Pennsylvania State University, and Arizona State University. So fuzzing is no longer a new concept. It's been around for many years, and there are a lot of existing fuzzers. So one of the most famous fuzzer is definitely American Fuzzy Lab. And it is so famous that there are a lot of existing works based on AFL and trying to improve it. For example, we have a lot of fuzzy rabbits in the field of fuzzing. And basically speaking, AFL family, which is coverage-based fuzzers family, are going to collect dynamic information during runtime, which is often coverage information. And then they mutate inputs based on this coverage information accordingly and trying to get new coverage information. So basically, this helped researcher to turn a vulnerability discovery problem into a coverage optimization problem. Notably, there is a special type of coverage-based fuzzers called hybrid fuzzers, but that's not the focus today. So coverage-based fuzzers are not perfect, of course. So let's dive a little bit deeper into the design of coverage-based fuzzers. Internally, coverage-based fuzzers have a queue of inputs that generate new coverage. And usually, as time goes by, this queue will grow larger and larger, and eventually introduce a lot of redundancies in the input queue. So to resolve this problem, coverage-based fuzzers introduce a mechanism called queue calling, which is they're going to prioritize a subset of input and then at the same time keep the same amount of coverage. Here, the criterion is execution time and input size. But within the favored queue, usually in most fuzzers, there is no prioritization difference between them. But basically, it means that all inputs in the favored queue will be treated equally. And fundamentally, it's because all coverage measurements are treated equally. But what's the problem here? So let's have example. So there are two branches here. One will call memcopy, one will just print some error messages. As a human researcher, you will immediately notice that memcopy is dangerous. If you don't use it carefully, it's very likely it will lead to a seg fault. And you probably want to spend more time on the memcopy branch. But fuzzers don't have this external information. So they're going to spend equal time on both branches, which is security-sensitive branch, which is the memcopy one, and the print error one, which is security-insensitive one. Here, by saying security-sensitive, we are saying that it is more likely to be involved in memory corruption vulnerabilities. And as a result, a lot of time will be spent in those security-insensitive paths, which will delay the timing of finding vulnerabilities. In a limited time frame, that means we're going to find fewer vulnerabilities. To make things even worse, there is a new technique called anti-fuzzing that actually exploited this feature. So let's think about this. They're going to inject a lot of fake coverage measurements into a program, or let's say fake path. And then when all those fake paths are added to the queue, and the fuzzer will say, okay, we have n+1 path here, and we're going to treat them equally, and a lot of time will be wasted on those fake paths, and even further reduce the efficiency of fuzzers. So what should we do then? It sounds like the root cause is actually we treat coverage measurements equally. So what if we don't treat them equally? So it sounds like we need to find a method to prioritize inputs that will lead to security-sensitive branch, which is branch A here. So, So it's like we need to have a prioritization strategy that it can prioritize input that reflects security sensitivity. But then what should be the indicators? If we have those indicators as matrices, we can naturally design a new queue calling scheme and resolve the issue. As previous works has presented, metrics defined at different granularities can contribute differently to vulnerability discovery process. So based on this intuition, we define metrics at 3 different levels, which is first function level, and loop level, and basic block level. So let's think about this. At function level, we abstract memory accesses as function themselves. And when we're doing, for example, mem copy, we will be extremely careful because it's dangerous, as you can imagine. But wait a second, is it just mem copy? What about other functions like free, malloc, stir copy, and moves? So it sounds like there is a list of functions that are inherently dangerous. So based on the intuition, we crawled all call stacks from CVEs and in the latest 4 years, and we came up with this table. Actually, as you can see, this table is consistent with our intuition that memcopy, free, Zerland are actually involved in memory corruption vulnerabilities a lot. So at function level, we mark these functions as dangerous. And if the destination basic block of an edge is going to call these functions, we will mark it as suspicious and use the number of function calls to these functions as the score at function level. And based on the similar intuition, we're going to use loops as the metrics at loop level. The intuition is very similar. Incorrect looping condition is often the root cause to buffer overflow and underflow. So here, we use the back edge to represent the whole loop to reduce some redundancies, and we can take loop into account into our matrices. And we're talking about memory corruptions. Definitely, we need to talk about memory accesses. So at basic block level, we calculate all the memory access instructions and use the number of instructions as the score at basic block level. And with all these 3 matrices, we sum them up and use the total score as the score of coverage accounting score. And we set a threshold. If the score of coverage accounting is above the threshold, we will prioritize this input. So then we can have a design very naturally. So beside the original coverage information map, we also keep a coverage accounting information map during runtime. And then when the queue calling happens, instead of just prioritize fast inputs, we're going to prioritize security sensitive inputs first, and then use the original queue calling scheme as a backup. So eventually, we're going to have a favored queue with security sensitive inputs prioritized. And then we have a lot of AFL families here. We propose TortoiseFuzz as the implementation of coverage accounting. As you can imagine, actually, this name is taken by the kid's story, The Hare and the Tortoise. Implementation-wise, we implement coverage accounting on AFL as TortoiseFuzz, and we implement 2 versions of TortoiseFuzz so that it can work on both source code and binary. And we have a new technique called coverage accounting and a new fuzzer called TortoiseFuzz. But what do we gain? So we need to do evaluations. Here, we ran TortoiseFuzz on 30 real-world programs, and all these programs are extracted from previous work, not randomly, but from previous work. But instead of using the specific versions that used in previous work, we pulled the latest version. And as suggested in previous work, we ran each experiment for 140 hours to observe the performance over time. And to rule out the possibility that we were just being lucky and get a very good result, we ran each experiment for 10 times. And we also used some statistical tools to justify our claim. So let's see the result. As you can see, TortoiseFuzz can outperform 5 out of 6 state-of-the-art fuzzers and achieves this similar comparable results with QSIM, which is a state-of-the-art hybrid fuzzer. And then to dive a little bit deeper into the comparison between TortoiseFuzz and QSIM, we measured the memory usage of them. This is actually a very representative memory usage figure here. TortoiseFuzz, on average, only uses 2% of memory usage of QSIMs. But it doesn't matter much, actually. We claim that coverage accounting is actually complementary to other fuzzers. To demonstrate that, we implement coverage accounting on QSIM itself, and it helped QSIM to get around 30% performance improvement. But coverage accounting was not designed to beat anti-fuzzing, but because of the design and the nature of coverage accounting, it actually shows the robustness to anti-fuzzing to some degree. Recall what we talked about anti-fuzzing? Anti-fuzzing will inject a lot of fake coverage measurements into the program. But during coverage accounting, we're going to prioritize inputs that is security sensitive. And all those fake paths are actually contain only a few matrices. And so they're going to be deprioritized. And it actually does not affect the performance of coverage accounting much. Yeah. And then we need to evaluate anti-fuzzing against, we evaluate our work against anti-fuzzing. This is the result of AFL. So as you can see, it's pretty good. And this is the result with AFL targeting programs compiled with anti-fuzzing. As you can see, there is a nearly 40% of performance degradation here. And, and as you can see, the top one, this line is actually the result of TortoiseFuzz against the normal programs. As you can see, this TortoiseFuzz can achieve comparable result in terms of code coverage with AFL. And then when it's targeting the programs compiled with anti-fuzzing, it is affected. And but the performance degradation is only about 25%, and it shows the robustness to some degree. And we're not claiming that TortoiseFuzz is not affected at all. And so in conclusion, we propose coverage accounting, which is complementary to other coverage-based fuzzers. And we design and implement TortoiseFuzz, and we're going to release it at GitHub here. And we evaluate TortoiseFuzz on 30 real-world programs, and we find 20 zero-day vulnerabilities. And TortoiseFuzz outperforms 5 state-of-the-art fuzzers and achieves comparable results with QSIM, with only 2% of memory usage of QSIM. This is the end of my talk. Thank you very much. I'm free to accept any questions.
Awesome, that was quick. We have lots of time for questions.
Thanks. Great work. So I think the point of coverage, this is Hong Hu from Georgia Tech.
Sure.
Okay. So I think the point of coverage accounting is you think the coverage is not equal. Some are important and some are less important. Right. So you should focus on the most important one and ignore others. But it's very interesting to see you still evaluate the coverage at the end to measure the effectiveness of TortoiseFuzz. So can you explain why do you still use this metric?
You mean we evaluate the coverage, right?
Right.
So TortoiseFuzz was not designed to get more coverage, right? So we worry that it's that possible that we focus on the security-sensitive path and then it has some negative impact to the coverage discovery. And as you can see, this worry was not based on nothing. Initially, I think it's before 40 hours or something, the coverage, the discovered edge found by TortoiseFuzz was actually lower than AFL's. And then later it caught up and then surpassed AFL, right? Yeah.
Okay, so I think that it definitely shows the coverage is not not a good metric to evaluate the effectiveness of fuzzing, right?
Not exactly true. Actually, we're emphasizing here. What we want to emphasize here is we want to explore more meaningful coverage instead of like treat all coverages the same.
Okay, so I have another question. So I'm one author of this anti-fuzzing technique. Do you think we can develop a solution just to inject this fake path to what you care and propose an anti-TortoiseFuzz technique?
That's a very good question, actually. But anti-fuzzing, so in the nature, anti-fuzzing is not unlimited. So in the third model of anti-fuzzing, those programs compiled with anti-fuzzing are going to be shipped to users, right?
Yeah.
So you cannot inject a lot of memory, you cannot inject a lot of overhead into the program. And memory access, which is what we care about, is very costly. And if you, right? So you can't do that, like to inject insanely amount of memory access into it. And in practice, they do inject memory access into programs. So we only talk about one technique here, which is inject fake path or fake coverage measurements. But there is another technique. They will inject memory accesses in a loop. So that's where the performance degradation came from, actually.
Okay, it's very interesting. I think we can discuss offline more about this. Yep. Thanks.
Thanks.
Cool. Let me stick or go back to his coverage question for a bit. You're still interested in exploring coverage, but would it be safe to summarize that you are skewing the exploration towards areas that are likely more vulnerable with the vulnerable function that you mentioned? So you're still interested in more coverage,
yes,
but not just a high single or double-digit number of coverage, but you're skewing inputs towards areas that are more interesting.
Right, yes. And actually, so this design will get us a, how to say, more consistent results. As you all know, the fuzzers will generate, have different results in probably drastic different results each run. But this will guide us only to the security sensitive path. And so it will get a more consistent result each run. Yes.
Nice, nice. Other questions?
Yeah, I just want to follow up your questions, I guess. So, I mean, do you observe any cases that actually performs worse? Because in a case, I mean, you definitely kind of skew your exploration towards those operations, but you know, fuzzing sometimes do have to, explore some other less important, paths or seeds such that it can later on make breakthrough. But if you so, aggressively just walk towards those areas, it may actually, perform worse in some cases.
So so you talk about performance, but what do you mean by performance?
I guess, but more concretely, do you, in your evaluation, do you observe any programs that actually perform worse?
By saying coverage,
by coverage or crashes and.
No, sorry.
No.
That's basically the idea of FairFuzz and AFL fast, right? So we compared with them and we outperformed them. And I think there is a graph in the paper saying that we found 9 vulnerabilities that no other fuzzers can find. And then, yes, I mean, in terms of coverage, yes. AFL fast or FairFuzz can get more coverage than TortoiseFuzz, but in terms of vulnerability discovery, I think to my best knowledge, no.
Okay. Oh, thanks.
Nice. So Henk can go ahead and create a fuzzing benchmark that just renames memcopy to yada yada, and you will no longer find it.
Can I say it again?
Simply replacing memcopy with a different name will bias your fuzzer against this function, right?
Oh no, I don't think. Well, we have the list of dangerous functions, right? So if you can modify all those functions, probably yes.
Right.
But usually you can't, right? Yep.
Right. Cool. Other questions? Going once, going twice, going 3 times.
Hello, I'm Adrian. So my question is the comparison with existing fuzzers fair? Because the programs you're evaluating the fuzzers on, like AFL has existed for a while, so someone might have gone and fixed the sorts of bugs that AFL could have find.
That's why we evaluated against 6 other fuzzers, like not just AFL. But are we talking about anti-fuzzing?
Well, okay, so my question is, by comparing with existing fuzzers, the existing fuzzers have been out there for a while, and the types of vulnerabilities that they could find may have been patched.
The type of
Let
vulnerability?
me rephrase this question.
Yeah. Thanks.
Assume you're fuzzing is a statistical random process, right? You're doing sampling in the state space. If you do have a specific sampling method, and assuming bugs are random, like somewhat distributed, with the existing fuzzer, you already find all these bugs that this sampling technique will be able to cover. If you introduce a new sampling technique, you're likely going to find different bugs. So his question was that, is it fair to compare the other fuzzers that have already discovered all the vulnerabilities that they will ever find with the fuzzer that you have now introduced?
So basically, it's about we define our metrics on existing vulnerability types, right? So you're saying that our fuzzer cannot find new vulnerability type, right? No? Sorry, I misunderstood the question.
So he tried to say that assuming you have fuzzers that are developed at different times, if you take the software off that version from that time when the fuzzer was initially tested and run it on this fuzzer, it will find n bugs. After these bugs are patched, it's no longer going to find new bugs because it reached a plateau on this particular kind of software. If you now introduce a new fuzzer, it will find different kind of bugs. So you're comparing different distributions. So to maybe concretize the question, when comparing the different fuzzers, did you go back to an earlier version from before these fuzzers for the software?
I get a question. I get what you mean. So to evaluate that, actually we don't have a comprehensive evaluation on this, but we do have a sample, which is I think the program is Exiv2, which is a image parsing library. So actually we use the same fuzzer, and we found some vulnerabilities, and we submit those vulnerabilities to them, and then patch them once, and we found new vulnerabilities, and we submit the bugs, and then patch it again 3 times.
This is a different question, but
Hey,
we'll take this offline.
All right.
Thank you. I think I have a sort of it's more of a comment, not really a question regarding the question that the gentleman just asked. I think this is a very interesting thing that he mentioned is that we have designed really good fuzzers like AFL and all the successors of AFL, and then we've been fuzzing many software packages rather than find bugs. Maybe now it's time to actually design a new fuzzer that doesn't really focus on the previous types of bugs or the previous, the cluster of bugs that we've been finding, but instead, finding new bugs, right? And then I think the cool thing about TortoiseFuzz is that you can use it as a complementary component to other fuzzers. So it doesn't necessarily mean that if you're using TortoiseFuzz, you cannot use other fuzzers anymore, right? You can also use AFL to find bugs that haven't been found. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm not one of the authors, right? So I don't have to do that. Yeah. I think the cool thing about that claim is that I think many other fuzzing papers are not evaluated in the same way, right? Because people have been using AFL for a very, very long time. We can always claim that hey, a lot of bugs are already found by AFL, and now we're just skewing our new fuzzer papers so that we can find bugs that maybe AFLs are not skewed towards finding them. Maybe I think this is a good thing that we should all think about for future evaluation.
I strongly agree. We also likely need some better benchmarks to actually test this based on some form of ground truth knowledge in addition to that, allowing us to compare the advantages of the different fuzzers going forward. Because this seems to be a recurring theme among many fuzzing papers that we read and that are published or even just submitted. Evaluation and evaluating different fuzzers and especially comparing them is incredibly hard. And yeah, I strongly agree that we should move towards a system where we can actually make this better. Other questions, or should we end this session with this nice overall theme? Let's thank Kyle and all the speakers again.
Thank you.